Shabbat shalom, everyone. You're doing well. This week's parsha is Bo. So we're in the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot, and as the title of the book of Exodus tells us, that is the story of the Exodus from Egypt. The beginning of Shemot, we have our new lead character, Moshe. Moshe and his brother Aaron and their sister Miriam, and Pharaoh, of course, the villain of the beginning of the story. So the Jewish people have been enslaved in Egypt for 210 years. Moshe is out in the deserts of Midian and he finds this burning bush. God speaks to him through the burning bush, and God says, Moshe, you will be the person who frees the people from the land of Egypt. And Moshe, he's scared, doesn't want to do it, doesn't think he's the right person, but he does it in the end. Okay, fine. So last week's parsha, Moshe goes to Pharaoh and says, please let my people go, let the people of Israel go. And Pharaoh says no. And so God sends the first of the 10 plagues, the first 7 plagues. And in this week's parsha, we have the last 3 plagues. So the last 3 are locusts, darkness, and the killing of the firstborn, death of the firstborn. So Moshe and Aaron go to Pharaoh. They say, Pharaoh, let our people go. Another plague, another plague. So locusts, then darkness, and then the final plague, the death of the firstborn, which ends up being the plague that finally makes Pharaoh, let the people free. Between the time of that ninth and 10th plague, God gives the Jewish people the first mitzvah that the Jewish people get as the Jewish people. And this is the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, of marking the first or the head of the month. And so it feels kind of interesting. Okay, so you're taking a pause, and if we're taking the timeline as it is, we don't know if we're truly taking the timeline as it is, but if we are, on the same day or around the time before the death of the firstborn, before the final moment of the Jewish people in the land of Egypt, God pulls Moshe and Aaron aside and says, by the way, this is the first mitzvah of the Jewish people. Feels like odd timing, but it's not, of course, because the Jewish people are about to become the Jewish people. We're about to be Bnei Israel, and our first mitzvah is Rosh Chodesh. But what is Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh is taking charge and marking of time. And that is the only thing that the Jewish people, the most of all thing that the Jewish people did not have control over when you're a slave. When you're a slave, you don't have control over when you sleep, when you eat, when you get to take a break, when you have to work, all these things. You have no control over it. And we read that the Jewish people, they were kotzer ruach, they were short of breath because Pharaoh had given them such a difficult work that they were so focused on tangible things, on just getting by day to day to day, that they weren't even thinking about the idea of freedom, of ever being freed from this backbreaking labor. And that is I think that often happens to us in our day to day, that we have this kotzer ruach of social media, of our jobs, of things that aren't truly meaningful or significant in our lives. But we get distracted. The kotzer ruach, we're so out of breath. We don't have time to think about spirituality. And the Jewish people were absolutely short of breath, not able to even of course, ruach means breath, but it also means like spirit. That they were short of spirit, that they couldn't even think about being free. So I think oftentimes we have this difficulty as well. And Rosh Chodesh allows us both a time to slow and recognize, mark time, control time, and also to be spiritual and to mark gratitude. It's important in Jewish tradition. We have a lot of things that mark time. We have Shabbat. We have and that this comes on certain times. Shabbat comes, Rosh Chodesh comes on certain times. Our holidays come on certain times. And speaking of holidays, this is also where we get the mitzvah for the holiday of Pesach, the holiday of Passover. So as we know, the final plague is the death of the firstborn. God tells all the Jewish people to sacrifice a goat, a lamb, and to put the blood of the lamb on their doors so that God knows which houses to avoid, to not kill the first, kill the firstborns. And so you will remember this day, the day that you were spared and the day that you were freed from the land of Egypt, because this is Pesach, this is the story of Pesach. And of course, the Jewish people are in a rush to leave the land of Egypt, and so they don't have time to let their matzah rise. And so for thousands of years, we now eat dry crackers to remember this. But the number one thing about these mitzvot of the story of Pesach is there's 3 times that it's mentioned. You should remind your children when they ask, why do we do this odd tradition of eat these dry crackers and do these silly things? Why is this what we do? And you say to them, it literally gives you an answer, the question and answer. God took us out of Egypt, and we will mark this with this. Like, it's really very straightforward. Why is it that we have to talk to children about this? Why is it that we have these odd traditions? Because it helps children to remember. And it's very important because children are the future. Education is the future. A society is built by a true great society is built by its education. And we know this. This is classic Jewish vibes. The Pesach Seder is all about children. I talk about this every single year on Pesach, that there's the 4 questions. We have the Afikomen. We have all the explanation questions and answers and the 4 sons. All of it is about children and doing odd things so that children notice and know. And this, endless gratitude from God that we were once strangers in a strange land, but we were brought out of Egypt, brought back to our homeland, Eretz Yisrael. And we're so, endlessly grateful for that. And that is still part of our Jewish narrative. So that's this week's Parsha, Bo. Uh, and that's that. Shabbat Shalom. God willing, you'll all have a great week, and I'll see you, God willing, next week.